Welcome to the Value Cultures Podcast, where we discover and explore the stories of the leading figures in video games. We're delighted today to welcome Jerk Gustafsson, studio head and co-founder of Sweden's Uppsala-based MachineGames. MachineGames is part of the ZeniMax portfolio of game studios, which was acquired by Xbox in 2020. MachineGames is the maker of the beloved Wolfenstein franchise and most recently made a significant contribution to Lucas's Indiana Jones franchise with the award-winning Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Jerk and I have gotten to know each other well over the last few years, and I'm excited about our conversation. Welcome to the pod, Jerk.
Thank you so much, Daryl.
It's great to have you. How are things going so far this year in Uppsala and Sweden?
Well, it's the start of a new year, so a lot of things are going on at the same time, but I think we're good. Team is good. I think we are looking very optimistically towards the future, which is a nice place to be. So I think in general it's good. Obviously it's dark in Sweden and a bit cold, but that is also just good for game development,
Yeah, that's right. Every time I talk to someone at MachineGames at this time of the year, it's usually the morning for me, and it looks like it's midnight for you and your colleagues. Especially if you guys are in the room with the window that looks out over Uppsala. So I'm always struck by that. It's like, well, they must be working hard on the games under these circumstances.
We're used to this. When we go to work in the morning, it's dark, and when we leave, it's dark. And that is not because we work long hours. It's just because that's the way it is up north.
Yeah. I think it's also because you guys work long hours, I think. But anyway, it's so great to have you, join the pod. And Jerk, one of the things that we love to do with our guests is, and I think what our audience expects at this point is to hear a little bit more about your journey into games. I think that the thing that I've discovered from working with gaming leaders for like the last 15 years or so is that everybody has a very different story into games. There isn't a conventional path. I know something about the Jerk story, but I think our audience doesn't. So tell us, how did you get into games as a career?
I was never, very into computers, to be honest. My brother was much more so. He was the one having all the Commodores and Amigas back in the days. I actually didn't get my first computer until 1996. I was working in construction. I had done that for 10 years already. And then I got some money because I just did this sports betting thing. So I won like $400 or something like that. And then I had some discussions with my friends and they convinced me to buy a computer. So that's what I did. I think this was, one of the early Pentium computers, pretty early in 1996. And when I actually bought that computer, it was a package deal. So at the same time, I got the game Quake, which was just released, right? Then, I got home, hooked up to, I also bought this, I think it was 14400 modem at the time. So I hooked up to the internet and, I started to play Quake. And then eventually I got more online and I discovered this, and this was the big thing for me. I discovered that you can actually, because I love the game, I played it over and over again. But I discovered that, you can actually make your own maps. That was such a big thing for me. Just the idea of it was just amazing. Then I went into this downloading editors, trying them out and trying to learn, which was very challenging for me in the beginning because I wasn't really technical in a way, but eventually get it. There's a lot of community support, all these things. And then I started to build Quake maps. And then I did that for couple of years, first for Quake 1 and then Quake 2. And then I was approached by Magnus, who just started Starbreeze Studios up in the northern part of Sweden. This was 1998. Then I joined Starbreeze that winter. Yeah. So that's basically my path into gaming. So very, very much through modding, basically just being part of that big, still actually active modding community for Quake.
Yes. One subset of people in games today, they entered the path through modding, just as you're describing. That's one I know that has been a rich vein of talent for the gaming industry. But I'm curious, just going back, would you have said about yourself before you had this sports betting windfall and made this investment that, essentially changed your life? Would you have described yourself as a creative person before that? When you were in school, when you were growing up, did you have this kind of creative impulse, or was it really playing Quake and falling in love with that game and wanting to extend that game?
I actually had that, and I wasn't so focused on it. I did some drawings and stuff like that, and I always was pretty good, at those type of classes in school. But I never really made anything with it. But when I was working in construction, this is pretty interesting because I did moved more into, initially it was just concrete work and stuff like that, but I moved into like more of a bricklayer or like masonry. So I ended up doing a lot of fireplaces and chimneys and stuff like that. And just building a fireplace is actually very creative, especially at that time, because you also drew designs of it, and come up with new ideas how to actually just to design it in general. So in a way, that is a very creative work, actually constructing something and building something from scratch like that. So I think I have that. I had that vein pretty early. So I got into that. As an example, my brother, he was much more in the just doing the heavy construction work, but got more into those tasks or jobs that was much more creative in that sense. So I think I had that from pretty early on. Yeah.
I love that. So I have to say, you're the first fireplace designer that I've run across. That fireplaces may have been the source of this creative spark for you. And this sounds almost like a very like a pre-Minecraft exploration of like getting every block in place, probably in a beautiful design. And so did you take pictures of your fireplaces? Do you have like a collection of the fireplaces that you built and designed over that time period?
You have to remember, Daryl, that we didn't have mobile phones back in that
That's
day.
right.
I'm that old. I didn't have a camera in my pocket. No,
There's
but I did a lot of that type of work. It's also good in a way because I always, through my entire career, also in gaming, I always knew because I kind of like that work. You work with
yeah,
your body and all these things.
yeah,
A lot of work is outside as well. So I always seen it as something to fall back on, you know,
yeah.
if this gaming thing fails. It's always good to have that experience. It's always also good to have, a real job experience, I think, in a way. So
Yes.
I'm quite happy I did those years.
Well, when you live in Sweden, you can always fall back on fireplaces, probably, I think, which is good. So, I'm glad you have an alternative strategy if this whole game thing doesn't work out for you. So you mentioned your entry into the games industry through Quake and Magnus reaching out to you from Starbreeze. And so anytime that I talk to anybody from MachineGames, and this is true from when you and I met in New York City a few years ago when there was an Xbox leadership convening, it always goes back to Starbreeze in some ways. And so I wonder, could you just describe a little bit what the relationship, just for our listeners, the relationship between Starbreeze and MachineGames and how Starbreeze, in a sense, was the precursor to MachineGames?
Yeah, it very much was. So when we started up in northern Sweden, in a small town called Härnösand, we were 6 or 7 back then, end of '98. At that time, we didn't really know what we were doing. We just wanted to make cool games. And Magnus Högdahl, who was the founder of Starbreeze, were also very tech driven. He was a programmer and an insanely good engineer, developing his own engine. So in a way, everything we worked on there laid the foundation for everything we do today. And it's also interesting to me because of that group of people, if I think about it, 4 of those 7 we still work with today, which is pretty interesting, and also a testament to what it means and how important it can be to actually know each other well and actually have a strong foundation to build a studio upon. Our first game that we worked on was canceled. That was in 1999. That's when we actually got together with this group from Uppsala, closer to Stockholm in Sweden, where we are based today as well. They were called O3 Games, a game studio down here in Uppsala. And then we merged with them, moved down to Uppsala, and then, that became the new Starbreeze then. And we started to work on a game called Enclave, which was the first, game we actually released. That then moved into, I think, what at least I see as the start of the culture that we have built and fostered over the years, and also the type of games that we have done over the years. And that was when we were offered to do this movie game or movie license game based on the Chronicles of Riddick. It was Pitch Black back then because that was the name of that movie. So this is also when we decided to do what we actually initially wanted to do. Enclave was actually a game in third person. The first game we have ever done in third person. Also interesting enough, the only game that was our own IP. from that moment forward, we have only worked with established IPs and established character. But Riddick was the starting point for us, because that's when we decided to move over to first person, which we wanted to do because we always have this idea of really pushing immersion, and also we want to be the character, not just play the character. It's been a big thing for us over the years as well.
Yep.
So a lot of focus on first person, and then also we really pushed ourselves into the strong narrative part. So focusing a lot of that on that too. So I think that's where it started, and I think we can see a lot of that especially in Chronicles of Riddick, but also in The Darkness, the game that we did after Riddick. We can see a lot of that in the games we do today, especially in Indiana Jones, I think, which shares a lot of similarities with the Chronicles of Riddick game. So in a way, I think that considering that we have a foundation and a group of leaders that have been basically with us from the start, that we know each other well, we know how we work, we know what we want to do, and we understand each other in a good way. Obviously, we still have a lot of conflicts and arguments, but that's just part of the business, and that it should be like that, right? Because that's how you achieve good work. But I think we have been pretty consistent in the way we work from that moment forward. Obviously, we learned a lot. We have done a lot of mistakes over the years, but I think that's where the culture of Starbreeze and also MachineGames started. Because basically the team that started MachineGames when we left Starbreeze is basically the same team that started Starbreeze.
Things that I take away from this story are, one, you really figured out what you wanted to be about in games, and there's obviously more to it than what I will describe right now, but it's just this idea of first-person games, an immersive experience with a very strong narrative dimension. So you know what you are about in terms of game development, and then just this incredible continuity of the relationships of the people involved in making the games. And what always follows from these kinds of relationships, these decades-long relationships, is this deep, deep bonds of trust that happen. So it's safe to have arguments. It's good to have these conflicts and arguments because they're not personal. They're about the games. And you know that it's all about building the best game possible rather than it being about some kind of a personal conflict. Like that's my impression always when I'm with you guys. Not that because you're Swedish, you don't complete each other's sentences like an American might. But you could if you wanted to. There's this deep listening that happens, but there's also this understanding, so you guys can work through problems pretty quickly, I think, because of this trust and because of what you know of each other, which is such an asset.
And you're absolutely right, and I think it hit the mark there. And I think in general, it's especially when it comes to problem solving, and sometimes like I said, it can be some arguments, conflicts, whatever. But everything comes out of passion, and passion for making good work and a good game. So it's usually quite easy to overcome those obstacles when you're working towards the same goal. And I think that's the important part.
Yeah.
And if you know each other and where you come from and how you actually work and how you present those ideas and how you present those arguments, then it makes things easier because you don't need to understand it over and over again.
I really became aware of you guys in a real way 5 or 6 years ago when ZeniMax became part of Xbox. And, I know the Xbox guys very well, but this next chapter that was so important for MachineGames was something that happened when I think that you and probably your colleagues visited Dallas, and I think it was 2010 or so when you went to ID and you were pitching Wolfenstein. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that moment, because I think that was a critical path moment for the evolution of MachineGames and what you are today as well.
It was, yeah. And it's funny that you bring it up, because obviously that was one of the toughest moments in our careers, or toughest periods, I would say, in our careers, because we left Starbreeze in 2009 after we did this updated version of Chronicles of Riddick with an additional expansion. And we struggled quite a long time, actually. We had obviously we were just seven of us who started MachineGames from the beginning. Like I said, in many ways, the same team that started Starbreeze back in '98, with some additions from some new people from Starbreeze as well. So we had a very good, strong group of people, but also trying to get something going and trying to get some strong publishing deals and good publishing. It was a huge challenge for us. So we spent a lot of time being in the US, trying to pitch in ideas, etc., to different publishers. Came to a point after a year, I think, when first one of the guys left, and then another, and then we just 5 of us left. And then we had been in some discussions with Bethesda, since we knew them a little bit previously, because we were talking about doing a game with published by Bethesda at Starbreeze. So we did have some contact with some people there. And then eventually, then the summer of 2010, early summer, we got to the point where they asked us, would you like to get an opportunity to work with the Wolfenstein IP, which was, a big deal for us, of course. First, it's just, one of those, probably one of the most iconic gaming IPs in the world, right? But not only that, it was also an id Software creation. And id Software was obviously, those guys were my idols, right? Since I came from the Quake community and started working with Quake. So when we get the opportunity then to travel to Dallas to id Software to actually start laying the foundation for what we would do with that IP, that was a big deal for us. But I also, at the same time, I think it was a test as well, from Bethesda or ZeniMax to see, were we the right people for this job? As
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we spend a lot of time at the office there to really work their asses off to have something to show after that trip. But it was really fun, actually. It was really fun. And those 3 weeks we spent in Dallas, we basically designed the entire Wolfenstein New Order game. So, we have, everything from start to finish, at least a high-level story arc and all the maps. What was actually what we delivered 4 years later, which is pretty cool as well. So the good thing there is, of course, that trip we managed to, not fool, but convince ZeniMax that we were the right team for that job. So then that led then to MachineGames being part of the ZeniMax family, and obviously a big deal for us because we were so poor at the time, so we could barely afford to eat, right? And then we got the opportunity to start a studio and start hiring for MachineGames and to start build the game. That was a cool experience. And I also got a temporary id Software email address, so I sent a lot of mails to my friends
right,
to show them. Yeah, this was a proud moment. Yeah,
this was the biggest moment for you since you won $400 in a in sports betting, right?
Yeah.
So was that the moment, because you guys had probably been a small team up to that point, was that the moment when you started growing and becoming more like the scale you are today, which, I mean, you have a substantial studio now, obviously, but is that the time that you marked the moment of this growth of the studio?
I mean, yeah, obviously it took some time to grow, but, like I said, we were 5 of us at the start of MachineGames. And then we had a lot of, people coming over from Starbreeze pretty quickly. But at the same time, then we started to recruit from other places as well, of course. I don't think we grew too fast. I think, at maybe mid-production of Wolfenstein New Order, we were about 50 maybe, something like that. So not too big. But obviously, we grew up to 50 or 60 people over 2 years. But then I think, in general, I think we have kept it pretty steadily over the years. Obviously, the games get bigger, the games get more ambitious, which they should, but they also get more complex. Technology advances. So the type of games we do require bigger teams. That's just the way it is. And I think we have adapted in a pretty good way. I think maybe Indiana Jones was a little bit, bigger. It turned out a little bit bigger than we expected from the beginning. I think we did a fantastic job with it, and the team did amazing. But it was maybe a little bit too big for the type of studio we are and the size of the studio. But I also think that is, a testament to the team and how well we operate nowadays and how productive and efficient we can be to actually pull that off. Compared to some other studios doing similar games, we are still pretty lean.
Yeah, you are. And it is extraordinary that like that game, Indiana Jones game, projects a much, like it would be typical that a much larger studio would make it. And so the thing this is very characteristic of MachineGames is that you guys are able to deliver a big punch with a relatively small team. But there's something I'm curious about, Jerk. So as you grew from that, 5 to 7 number right? On that initial trip to Dallas, and you've grown kind of organically and incrementally over the last, 16 years, let's say. My sense is that you would say, yeah, we still recognize our culture though as similar to what it was then. Obviously it's evolved, it's changed, et cetera. But I wonder, like, what have been the keys for you of maintaining the MachineGames culture, if that's in fact what's happened?
In a way, yes. I think especially in terms of how we work and how we communicate and I think basically how we actually make games. I think that part of the culture is pretty intact. The way we want to work creatively. I think though, obviously it's a big difference because the industry in general has grown up quite a lot. Back in the days when we started, when we were small, even during Enclave and the Riddick game, I slept at the office. I even have a mattress under my desk. So I just, in the evening, I just lie down and slept. And then I got up to the chair and continued to work. That's the way it worked back then. And obviously that has changed quite a lot as the industry has grown up. I do believe, though, that I kind of like to talk about crunch, actually. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because that was something that we all did back in the days. It was just part of the process. And I think we can say now, and we have been for some time now, that we are a crunch-free studio. We don't crunch anymore at MachineGames. And I think in general, the industry has grown up enough that we see less and less of that, which is great, right? But there's also a very positive aspect to crunch because you really get into the trenches together. You really see how you actually function and how much you can grow under pressure and when there's a lot of stress and a lot of work. And I think there are a lot of invaluable lessons in that. But at the same time, then, like I said, I think it's such a toxic word nowadays, this crunch word.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think about it a lot myself because nowadays I see sometimes, we ask for someone to work like 8 hours overtime per week for 4 weeks, which is just standard overtime. Any industry does that all the time. Doesn't matter if you work at a local supermarket or the paper factory, you do that type of overtime all the time. But crunch, that's what we're talking about then is like 8 months in a row, 7 days a week,
Right.
at least 12 hours a day. That's crunch, those long stretches of continuous burden and strong overtime. So I think if you haven't really experienced that, you don't really understand what it is and what it means.
Yeah.
So I think we are at another place at the moment where everybody screams crunch as soon as we ask them for a couple of hours overtime. But overtime can be very healthy and a very good tool to use to actually make better games. And I think overtime is a good thing in general.
Yeah.
As long as you can use overtime to make better games and polish and make the games better instead of just catching up, then overtime is a great thing. Crunch is a very, destructive thing. And it's a
Right.
totally different thing.
Right.
So I think that distinction is extremely important to make because the new generation, at least, my impression of it is that everybody sees everything as crunch nowadays, which is very, very far from the truth. And I think
Right.
that distinction is important.
Yes.
And at the same time, very, very important learnings. I'm actually quite happy that I went through these phases in my career because I've learned quite a lot from them as well.
When we were doing some of our preliminary research, when we were kicking off at Valued Cultures, we talked with 120 or so, game leaders as part of that process. And it's so interesting. Almost all the game leaders that had been in the industry for 10 plus years, they all had a story about crunch to share. They all had a story. And it wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't like looking at it through rose-colored glasses, but there was a recognition that it was this kind of trial by fire in a sense that brought their studio together, that advanced learning that allowed them to finish their game in time before their funding ran out, whatever the story might be. And I think that there is a recognition that it had value in retrospect, and very few people want to try to reproduce it because I think that most young developers would run away from any studio that said, yeah, we're a crunch studio. But there is something that's lost in terms of the learning, and also I think the team bonding. It's it's an analog. I know you're a big sports fan, and we could start talking about British football here if we wanted to, but there's something about like athletic teams going through training camps that are very rigorous, or military's training and boot camp and so on. And like, there's nothing like that bonding experience that you have when you're compressed together for a long period of time under pressure. And I do think that probably some of MachineGames' success is because you had that collective experience in your past, that as painful as it was probably also a very strong bonding experience. So
Yeah.
I think people are ambivalent about it from that point of view, but it is so interesting. It's such a kind of a coming of age story for most game studios and game leaders.
It is. And like I said, I also want to, really highlight that I think it's very good that the industry has grown up and we don't do
Right.
that as more. But there
Right.
is this aspect of, I compare
Yes.
it to when I did military service, because then everything was just horrible. It was a nightmare. I hated it. But now when I think back at my military service, I
Yeah.
think it was amazing,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I have fond memories of it. But at the
Yes.
time it was just painful.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the crunch stories are similar to that as well. You tend to look back at them with a smile on your face because you actually achieved something together as a team, and that's the important part.
Yeah. So just kind of changing tracks here. What is it about Sweden, Yerk? What is it about Sweden and great game making? Because, if you took the population of Sweden and then you compared it with Sweden's impact on the games industry, it's completely out of whack. Like just the number of great games and great game studios that come out of Sweden, MachineGames being one of them. What's in the water in Sweden? What's in the culture of Sweden that's kind of a superpower for game development?
It's also a very good question, because I think, in general, we are extremely proud to be a small part of the wonder of Swedish game industry, because it is a wonder. If I think about it, I think a lot of it has to do with actually how, this early, or maybe it started in the 80s, but we had this crazy home computer boom in Sweden, maybe late 80s, early 90s or mid 90s, where Swedish government pushed this home computer program. So basically it was employer subsidized when it comes to buying computers, and a lot of households, hundreds of thousands of households, got home computers very, very early. And then also the government invested in early broadband, affordable broadband, I should add, which is obviously very important. I think that in combination with a very strong social safety net here in Sweden. So basically it's very safe to take risks, start new companies, etc. English speaking, we're a very English speaking country. Everybody in Sweden speaks English, which also, of course, helped with that. So I think that early then focus on home computers is also what triggered all of these, gaming communities or communities with LAN parties, all of these things that we saw early in Sweden. And I think this is basically what has led to this such a strong gaming community and game development in industry in Sweden. But it's not only that either. It's also, we have seen things like Skype, Spotify, Storytel. There's a lot of those type of things that have come out of Sweden for the same reason, I think. But obviously, gaming is extremely strong here. I think in general, that whole home computer boom led to, a lot of different initiatives from the government. We had a very fun thing actually called Kort in Swedish. It's like computer driver license that a lot of people went through in school. That was also a government initiative. Instead of, some people should be good with computers, it became everyone is expected to be competent with computers. That was a
Right.
big thing in Sweden. So I think all of these initiatives was a great thing for Swedish game development, or Swedish industry in general, I should say.
Yes. I mean, it seems to me that there's been a strong public policy dimension to building this competence and this capacity, across Sweden of competence with computers. And then by extension of that, like what are all the ways that you can do that? And so we see, just as you say, the high-tech industry in Sweden in general is very, very strong, and games are this kind of subset of it. It's just fascinating to me because I've spent quite a bit of time in Sweden over the years, working especially with Mojang, which is one of your Xbox brethren, and hearing Mojang stories, hearing MachineGames stories, and so on, of like how people came up into the industry. there is this very strong public policy dimension to it in terms of the educational model and what the government's done to do that. So there is something here, I think, for national governments to be looking at, of like what Sweden did to stimulate that as part of the culture.
You mentioned an important thing there as well that I forgot, and that is the educational part. I think, gaming schools or game development schools started also very early in Sweden, which obviously contributes quite a lot to the industry.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is pretty impressive, like I said, the Swedish game development, especially when you look at everything from DICE and Battlefield to Mojang, like you said, King, all of these companies that are so insanely successful. But gaming itself is not, obviously the community is big, everybody has grown up, at least, maybe we're one generation away from actually everyone having grown up with games. But it's not such, there is something that is, I still don't think games are recognized enough, especially not by mainstream media, etc. Obviously the focus on movies and music is a lot bigger.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of work to do there to actually recognize the gaming achievements more. Obviously sometimes there are some highlights from, the Game Awards or something like that, but it's very rare in mainstream media.
Right.
And I think maybe it has to do with the celebrity factor. That's maybe part of it.
Right.
But it's also, considering the successes we have seen in Sweden. I think I just mentioned to you a few weeks ago, the fact that we are now nominated for a Grammy, which is a pretty big deal. And then I looked at the games that are nominated for a Grammy, and out of 5 games, 4 out of 5 comes from Sweden, which is pretty cool. But if you read mainstream media here in Sweden, all the news is about musical artists who was nominated for a Grammy.
Right.
So, because no one even thinks to mention or think about games, right? So I think there is some work to do there to actually be more recognized in mainstream as well, not only within gaming and gaming communities.
Yeah. So we started our work together, a few years ago as part of an effort to continue to grow the capacity of MachineGames and to, probably accelerate it to some degree. But I wonder if you could describe, like, okay, you guys are a studio now that's scaled. You've made a set of world famous, beloved games and so on. And yet you're not satisfied, meaning like you keep pushing the ambitions of what the studio can do. And to do that, maybe without growing enormously, it's like, hey, how do we build our studio capacity? How do we build our leadership capacity? So I wonder if you could speak to maybe a little bit of what we've done together, but also just your thoughts about how to grow MachineGames to amplify its impact on the industry.
It's also the reason that we are talking now, and I think that the work that we have done is very important, and I think it's great that we get help from you guys to actually work more on leadership in general, because I think as we grow, we need to spend more time to make sure that we actually build the team and prepare the team, not only to lead, but also to, in a way, to be led. So looking at the studio and what I think we need to focus on and what we have been looking at quite a lot is that everybody here, we know they have the skill, they have the individual skill. That's why they're hired. And usually we have seen over the years as well, if someone goes into a manager position, we promote them to a lead. It's usually because they're good at the skill, and then they have some strong soft skill that goes along with that makes them suitable to become a leader. But usually it starts with the skill. They need to have respect within the team to become a leader, etc., etc. But we are not really managers per definition. We're not educated to be manager. We're not educated to lead. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do there to actually make our leaders be better prepared and also be better, think more about how they prioritize their work, when it comes to actually making sure that we get quality output from the team and how we actually build the team stronger. And I think what we have been trying to focus on quite a lot is obviously, a lot of the soft values, but I think in general, if I think about it, I think it's about, there's 3 important things for me to look at. And I think that we have looked as well, obviously it's about just character. When, it's about how you behave as part of the team. I think is important, about being accountable, taking responsibility. It's about leading by example. And then I think a very important part is attitude. And this is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately as well, because the difference between, having a positive attitude and a negative attitude is, especially during challenging times and time pressure times, is really huge. It basically can be the main difference between success and failure in a way. And I also think attitude is about making that extra effort as well to continue to just move forward and do the work instead of just giving up when the pressure is high. So those type of values I think are very important to focus on for our leaders, combined then with our ambition, which obviously we have high ambitions. That I think will help building a stronger team. Basically how far are you willing to go in order to be successful? What are you willing to sacrifice to achieve your goals, etc. It's about learning and development. So I think we need to focus a lot more on those things than specifically just the skill. And I think we need to educate our leaders to actually manage that in a way, because at the same time, you also need to have the mindset that team performance is far more important than individual performance.
Yeah. What resonates for me, Jerk, in terms of our work together is the introduction of what we call the adaptive leadership model, and the tool that we use specifically for that, the skill will matrix. And a lot of what you're describing is like this combination of skill and will, in terms of the attitude, in terms of the skill sets and so on. And the skill sets, not just as game developers, we have very little to teach you about the skill of game development, but the skill of management and leadership, and the difference between management and leadership, and then joining that together with what do you do to inspire people, what do you do to motivate people so that they have a very, very strong will. And then, as you say, that becomes a vector towards the ambition that you have in terms of your next games that are ahead of you and so on. And so we're very excited to be part of that capacity development for especially your leadership, you and your leadership at MachineGames. And it's been exciting for us to see this growth and development of that leadership, that I see significant gains there and significant, sensitivity and awareness about it, and introducing new tools and so on. So what have you seen so far in the couple of years that we've been working together in terms of the capacity of the studio?
I've seen quite significant improvements, actually. And obviously, thank you for that. But I think in general, just making sure that our leaders are aware and thinking about these things and working with their team, just that alone has made a big change, of course, because the focus needs to be on that. And that's why I'm very much pro RTO. I want people to work in the office. For me, that's an important part of it. Because then you are together, you are part of a team. It's very easy to communicate cross department. So I think for me, we make better work when we do it together and when we are together as well. Because I think that human interaction, that more dynamic interaction between people on the team is very important to actually build a stronger team as well. That's one of the things that we always need to keep in mind. We're doing this together. We're doing this as a team, and and as a team, if you all work together towards the same goal, then you can achieve really, really cool things. And I think it's important to really, really focus on that at all times.
Well, we've had a ball working with you guys. It's an extraordinary group of people that you have assembled, and it's always a great deal of fun to do that. A lot of times we have to do that from afar, unfortunately, but when we are able to come to Uppsala and spend time with you all, it's just, you can feel the energy in the studio, the excitement about the games that you built, the pride that you guys have. And then we also get to spend time in a beautiful, university town in a lovely part of Sweden as well, which is a great bonus. But it really is a special group of people. And I know you're proud of what you guys have done so far, but also aren't satisfied. The thing that always strikes me about MachineGames is this pushing the envelope of the craft, pushing the envelope of what's possible, and growing the leadership capacity, I think, is a big part of that.
Absolutely, I agree.
I think it's common for game developers to have fallen in love with a specific game, and you started off today's conversation by talking about essentially falling in love with Quake, and then Quake becoming the the foundation of everything that followed for you in game development after you discovered that game, through your computer purchase. But I wonder if you could talk to us about what we like to call a level up game that you have fallen in love with recently. Is there a game that you have been spending your time with recently that you'd want the audience to know about?
Obviously, I play a lot of games. I love to play games, and I don't get tired of it. I'm also that person that get really into, sometimes almost obsessed. When I get close to the end, I just think about, when I get home, I will play, and I almost dream about the games at night. I really love to play games. And I think if I look at the game I played most is probably Elden Ring. I think that is a good example of something that I really, at least in a period, was very obsessed with. It's an amazing game. One of those games I 100% completed as well, played through it 3 times, probably even a bit more, to be honest. So it's just a remarkable game and a very good example of how far we have come in this industry and what type of experience we can actually deliver nowadays. And it's rather impressive. It's a true masterpiece, and I've always been a big From Software fan, but it's an amazing game, and obviously a lot of people have played it already, but I can't recommend it highly enough.
Well, that's a wonderful endorsement of a marvelous game. Jerk, as always, it's been a lot of fun talking, and thank you for your generosity and extending yourself for this and being part of our pod series. We've just been really, really delighted to have you.
Thank you so much.